You see, some people don't mind you surviving. They just can't stand you thriving. They're okay as long as you're crawling, but the moment you start climbing, they get uncomfortable. Because your rise is a revelation. It's a mirror. It exposes what they refuse to become. The problem isn't your favor. It's their refusal to grow. And when you start walking in your anointing, don't be surprised when those who once clapped for you now clap back at you. But don't you dare shrink. Don't you dare dim your light to make someone else feel comfortable in their darkness. Your rise has a divine assignment. And yes, it comes with resistance, but it also comes with authority. Your rise is not just a personal victory. It is a spiritual confrontation. Every step forward you take doesn't just speak about your future. It reflects someone else's past. It stirs up the truth they buried beneath excuses, fear, and convenience. They had the same chance to obey. They had the same access to the word, the same doors in front of them, but they chose not to walk through. Your movement reveals their stagnation. Your obedience shines a light on their delay. That's why they're not clapping. Because your rise isn't just inspiring, it's convicting. When you begin to walk boldly in your calling, the atmosphere around you starts to shift. People who once celebrated you now fall silent. It's not because you changed, it's because your growth reminded them of how much they chose to remain the same. You don't even have to say a word. Your life speaks for you. The discipline you embraced, the sacrifices you made, the pain you endured, it all becomes a mirror that reflects their reluctance. They can't unsee it, and they can't ignore it. Some of the very people you hoped would cheer for you will secretly root for your fall, not because you wronged them, but because your elevation threatens their excuses. Your courage dismantles their comfort zone. Your rise forces a conversation they were trying to avoid with themselves. And rather than confronting their own disobedience, they try to criticize your obedience. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing what they were afraid to do. Reluctance is subtle. It wears the mask of timing, of waiting on confirmation, of playing it safe. But underneath all those layers is often just fear dressed in church clothes. And when you move in faith, when you step into territory they never dared to explore, you expose the lies they made peace with. You disrupt the comfort they settled for. Your progress becomes their problem, not because you did anything to them, but because your light is too bright for their shadows to hide. They didn't expect you to rise. In fact, some of them bet on your silence, your fear, your collapse. But instead, you stood up, you spoke up, you broke through. And now, they can't look at you without confronting the moments they stayed seated when they should have stood. Your testimony is not just your triumph. It's their missed opportunity. It carries weight, and not everyone is willing to bear witness to it. You are the living reminder of what could have been. Every door God opens for you echoes the doors they ignored. Every miracle you walk in reminds them of the ones they stopped praying for. Every ounce of favor on your life highlights what they forfeited by playing small. You didn't steal their spot. You simply took the seat they never sat in. And now that you're seated, they don't know how to handle your presence. Jealousy doesn't always look like hate. Sometimes it looks like distance, silence, or fake applause. But don't be fooled. It's not about you. It's about what your rise reveals. It's about the fact that God did for you what they didn't believe He could do for them, or worse, what they didn't believe he would do unless they controlled the process. You moved without their permission, and that disrupted their illusion of power. Some people will pretend you changed just to avoid admitting that you grew. But you didn't change, you evolved, you transformed. You answered when God called, even when it was uncomfortable. And now your life is dripping with the evidence of obedience. That's what they really can't stand, that you were bold enough to say yes when they stayed stuck in maybe. The fear they feel isn't about you succeeding. It's about them being exposed. And the truth is, exposure is painful for those who have something to hide. They can't hide behind timing, connections, or confusion anymore. Not when your rise is living proof that obedience works. That favor follows the faithful. That oil flows where sacrifice has been poured. So don't misread their rejection. Don't internalize their discomfort. What you're feeling isn't personal. It's spiritual. Your rise is a divine spotlight on the places they refuse to go, the risks they refuse to take, the faith they refuse to walk in. And while they may fear your rise, heaven rejoices over it, because you dared to go where they hesitated. You dared to believe when they backed away. You dared to rise. Elevation has a way of stirring what people never intended to show. As God begins to lift you, it becomes impossible for others to hide what they secretly buried beneath their surface. Insecurity has a voice, and promotion has a way of turning up the volume. The higher you go, the more you start hearing murmurs, side comments, and backhanded compliments. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the light that's shining on you is revealing what's been dormant in them. Some spirits were quiet as long as you were low, but elevation exposes everything that was never healed. People who once celebrated you at your lowest may become silent spectators or subtle saboteurs as you rise. That's because your growth becomes a threat to their false sense of control. When you had nothing, you were safe. But now that you're becoming something, now that you're walking in the fullness of what God put in you, you've become a mirror to what they're missing. And insecure people don't attack with fists. They attack with silence, gossip, and distance. They won't say it out loud, but every move you make confronts the fear they haven't dealt with. Elevation doesn't just test your humility. It tests their loyalty. As God begins to position you, don't be shocked when familiar faces begin to shift. Some were never loyal to your calling. They were loyal to your limitation. They were comfortable with your potential, but your progress triggers a fear that they are being left behind. Insecurity starts whispering lies to them that your success means their failure, that your rise means their relevance is fading. And those lies make them react not out of wisdom, but out of woundedness. When you rise, you don't just gain visibility, you gain scrutiny. But the scrutiny often comes from those who feel unseen themselves. Your elevation reminds them of every step they didn't take, every risk they didn't choose, every call they ignored. Insecure spirits feel exposed not because you did something to them, but because your presence wakes up what they thought they buried. They see your light and panic because it reveals the cracks in their identity, their faith, and their confidence. Jealousy is insecurity in action. It's the emotion of someone who sees in you what they've refused to develop in themselves. You didn't take their gift. You didn't steal their opportunity. But your obedience magnifies their disobedience. Your progress reminds them of promises they abandoned. So their spirit flinches. They project, they twist your motives. They question your heart. Not because you've changed, but because their insecurity has no place to hide anymore. Elevation brings exposure, but it doesn't always expose evil. Sometimes it just exposes immaturity. People you love may become distant, not because they hate you, but because they don't know how to process what God is doing in your life. Insecure people don't know how to handle favor when it's not flowing through them. They confuse your faith with arrogance, your confidence with pride, your influence with attention seeking. But they don't realize you bled for this oil. You prayed for this moment. You paid for this platform in private places they never saw. Some people only loved the version of you that needed them. But elevation exposes their dependency on your weakness. Now that you've grown, now that you don't need their validation, they feel irrelevant. And that shakes their foundation. Insecure spirits need control to feel valuable. And when they can no longer control your steps, they question your anointing. Not because you're out of line, but because you're out of reach. What's wild is that your rise will often expose insecurity even in those you admired. People you once looked up to may begin to compete, compare, or correct you unnecessarily. Not because you dishonored them, but because your rise makes them feel displaced. And elevation doesn't create that feeling. It reveals it. It was always there, hidden behind smiles and hugs. But now that God is using you visibly, their insecurity begins to speak louder than their wisdom. You will begin to recognize the shift when conversations change, when support becomes silence, when they stop celebrating what used to excite them. That's not coincidence, it's exposure. And while it may hurt, it's necessary. Because elevation doesn't just come with blessings, it comes with clarity. God uses your rise to clean the room of every hidden motive and every insecure alliance. It's not punishment, it's pruning. So every time God elevates you, be ready for what it will uncover. Not everyone can celebrate a table they weren't invited to sit at. And not every spirit can stand the light of your breakthrough. Elevation is a spotlight, and it shows more than your favor. It reveals the foundation of everyone around you. You were never designed to fit in because you were born to stand out. The discomfort you've always felt in certain spaces wasn't a flaw. It was a signal. God wired you differently, marked you uniquely, and positioned you for something that couldn't be accomplished in the safety of the crowd. The crowd is where people lose themselves to blend in, but your calling won't allow that. You feel the tension because your spirit rejects what your surroundings have accepted. That uneasiness isn't weakness. It's evidence that you carry something rare, something sacred, something disruptive. From an early age, you probably noticed that you didn't quite move like everyone else. You couldn't laugh at what they laughed at. You couldn't go where they went. You couldn't find peace in the places others called home. That's because the crowd is comfortable for those without conviction. But when you've been set apart by God, the ordinary becomes frustrating. You hunger for more. You ache for purpose. And the noise of the crowd feels like static when your soul is tuned to divine frequency. That's why no matter how hard you tried, the fit never felt right. The crowd loves conformity. It rewards silence and celebrates sameness. But your oil is offensive to that system. The weight of your anointing breaks the rhythm of mediocrity. And because you refuse to be what they've settled for, they call you proud, different, or too intense. But deep down, they know it's not arrogance. It's authenticity. You're not trying to be better. You're trying to be obedient. And obedience always looks strange to those who are more loyal to comfort than calling. You were never meant to follow the patterns of the many. God carved a path for you that doesn't make sense to the majority. And the danger is that when you try to silence your difference just to gain their acceptance, you forfeit the very thing that makes you powerful. The crowd teaches you to hide your hunger. But God says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness." You weren't born to starve in the crowd. You were born to feast in the secret place. That hunger will never be satisfied with popularity. It was made for presence. The discomfort you feel in the crowd isn't just spiritual. It's prophetic. It's God reminding you that you weren't made to echo. You were made to declare. You weren't built to follow trends. You were built to shift atmospheres. That pressure you feel is not rejection, it's redirection. Every time you tried to blend in and something broke, that was heaven blocking your assimilation. God refuses to let you dilute yourself for the approval of people who never saw your true worth. When you're in the crowd too long, your vision gets blurred. You begin to doubt your difference, question your assignment, and silence your voice. But the very thing that makes you uncomfortable is what's calling you higher. You've always sensed it. That tug, that pull, that itch to rise above the noise, that's your destiny whispering louder than your fear. And the more you ignore it, the louder the discomfort gets. Because purpose doesn't stay silent when you try to suppress it. It breaks through with urgency. You were born with a voice that shakes foundations, not one that gets lost in the echo chamber. You weren't made to walk the wide road. You were made for the narrow gate. And the narrow gate is lonely, it's costly, and it's uncomfortable. But it leads to life. The crowd will always choose convenience, but you were built for conviction. The reason they don't understand you is because they don't carry what you carry. And that's okay. You don't need their comprehension to walk in your calling. The crowd has a way of seducing you with temporary applause. But what good is applause when it costs you your identity? What good is popularity when your soul feels vacant? You were born to host glory, not opinions. And the more you grow, the more you realize that peace doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from being aligned. That misfit feeling, it's divine. It's heaven saying, "You weren't made for them. You were made for me." You can't elevate while trying to be accepted by those who fear heights. The reason they're comfortable where they are is because they've stopped climbing. But not you. You've still got breath, which means you've still got steps. And though the path is steep and the crowd is loud, your discomfort is proof that you're still ascending. You weren't meant to get stuck in circles of comfort. You were born to break cycles and build altars. And altars aren't built in the middle of crowds. They're built in the wilderness of separation. The oil on your life didn't come to make you popular. It came to make you powerful. But power doesn't flow in the comfort zone. It flows in surrender, and surrender requires that you leave behind the need to belong. You don't need to belong in rooms where God never sent you. Your identity was forged in the fire of difference. And the discomfort you feel in the crowd is not punishment. It's preparation. Because the stage God is building for you will require all of the boldness that the crowd tried to shut down. Every time God takes you higher, He doesn't just expand your territory. He exposes what's been living quietly in the corners. New levels don't come with just new blessings. They come with new battles, new burdens, and new sets of eyes watching you. With every promotion, God peels back another layer of comfort and reveals what you didn't even know was hiding in you or around you. The higher you go, the thinner the air gets. And that thinness doesn't just apply to oxygen, but to excuses, to disguises, to pretense. What you could get away with on the last level, God won't let slide on this one. Some of the people who smiled with you at the bottom won't be able to celebrate you at the top, not because you changed, but because your elevation exposed the motives they worked hard to hide. When you were beneath them, they loved you. When you started climbing, they tolerated you. But now that God has positioned you where they never thought you'd be, their true posture is revealed. That's not pettiness. That's pruning. God doesn't just elevate to show off His glory through you. He elevates to remove anything and anyone that can't survive at the altitude He's called you to. New levels reveal insecurities, both yours and others. When God increases your influence, it forces you to confront parts of yourself that were easy to ignore when no one was watching. Now, with the spotlight comes accountability. You don't get the luxury of hiding behind small thinking or silent disobedience anymore. You must be intentional with your words, your decisions, your circle. The higher the position, the greater the precision God demands. Exposure isn't always about scandal. Sometimes it's about sanctification. It's about God purging what can't go where He's taking you. Every platform you step onto brings a new perspective, but it also brings new pressure. And pressure always produces revelation. You start to see who's really with you and who's simply using you. You notice patterns in people you used to excuse. You sense shifts in relationships you once depended on. That's not paranoia. It's discernment. Your new level requires spiritual eyes to recognize the snakes that slither silently until the moment of strike. God exposes before He protects. He lets you see it before He frees you from it. On this new level, your time becomes more valuable, your focus more critical, and your warfare more targeted. The enemy doesn't waste bullets. He aims for influence. And with exposure comes attacks you never experienced before. But don't mistake opposition for disqualification. The warfare is proof you're in position. It's confirmation that what God is doing through you is shaking the very foundations of what the enemy tried to build. And because you didn't fall at the last level, hell is now trying to stop you before you get comfortable at this one. You'll notice that exposure doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like betrayal, like heartbreak, like loneliness. That's because God is removing false attachments. He's cutting ties with what looked like covenant, but was really convenience. And while it hurts in the moment, it's protection in the process. He's saving you from soul ties that would have suffocated your future. So don't mourn the loss of people who were never called to steward your next. Their departure is confirmation that your destiny demands purity. As you continue to rise, your character becomes the foundation on which everything stands. Talent might get you in the room, but character keeps you there. And character can't be faked at higher levels. That's why God exposes what's still wounded, what's still weak, what's still immature, not to shame you, but to strengthen you. He shows you the cracks not to condemn you, but to heal them before the weight of glory rests on you. Exposure is God's mercy wrapped in discomfort. People will start to form opinions about you based on fragments, because elevation doesn't just expose others to you. It exposes you to others. And not everyone will understand the cost of your calling. They'll see the crown, but not the cross you had to carry. They'll judge the favor, but not the furnace that forged you. But you're not responsible for their misunderstanding. You're responsible for your integrity. Let God be your defender while you keep your hands clean. The higher you go, the more you have to guard your heart, because not every opportunity is an open door from God. Some are distractions dressed as destiny. That's why God exposes your own desires, too. He'll show you where pride tries to sneak in, where ambition gets ahead of obedience, where impatience tempts you to compromise. Exposure is God's scalpel. It cuts to heal. He's not trying to embarrass you. He's trying to build you into someone who can handle the weight of the mantle. This new level requires a new level of surrender. You can't take shortcuts. You can't pretend. You can't fake what must be formed. God elevates with intention, and He exposes with precision. Every layer He pulls back, every relationship He removes, every issue He uncovers. It's all preparation. Not for applause, but for assignment. Because glory doesn't rest on the gifted. It rests on the clean. And exposure is heaven's way of making sure you're clean enough to carry what's coming next. Your rise is not just about your story. It's about what your story unlocks in others. You may think you're just surviving, just pressing forward one day at a time, but God is using your journey as a living prophecy. Your elevation is not random. It is a strategic response from heaven to the cries of a broken generation. There are people watching you who have given up on hope, given up on faith, and given up on God until they see what He's doing in you. Your life is proof that God still hears, still moves, and still delivers. There's a generation suffocating under depression, confusion, and spiritual apathy. They don't need another lecture. They need a model. They need to FC what faith looks like, not just hear about it. And when you rise from what should have buried you, when you keep moving through trauma, rejection, failure, and pain, you don't just inspire them, you wake something up in them. Something deep, something eternal. Your breakthrough becomes their permission. Your strength gives them a glimpse of their own. You didn't go through all that warfare, all that pressure, all that betrayal just for personal gain. God allowed it so your triumph could carry weight. You're not just climbing for yourself. You're clearing the path for others who didn't believe it could be done. There are people tied to your progress. They've been stuck for years, but your obedience is shaking the chains off of their perspective. They'll rise because you did. They'll believe because you didn't break. God is strategic. He plants leaders in plain sight, not always with microphones or titles, but with scars and oil. You may not feel qualified, but your survival is your credential. You've endured what others didn't make it through, and now your life preaches a message that words never could. You are God's answer to a question the world has been asking. Is hope still real? And when they see you thriving after trauma, worshiping through loss, walking in power after pain, They realize the answer is yes. You are a generational interrupter. You are the divine disruption to cycles of silence, shame, and spiritual apathy. God is using your story to shift atmospheres. Your rise is a message to a weary people that they haven't been forgotten, that there's still purpose on the other side of pain, that ashes can still give birth to beauty. You are carrying evidence that heaven invades earth through surrendered vessels. People may never read a Bible, but they'll read your life. The battles you faced weren't just about you. They were about what was coming through you. Hell fought you so hard not because of your past, but because of your potential. The enemy knew your rise would activate others, that your courage would become contagious, that your transformation would inspire deliverance in people who didn't even know they needed it. You are dangerous to darkness, not because of a platform, but because of the power that flows from your obedience. You may have felt overlooked, underestimated, forgotten, but heaven never forgot. God was shaping you in the shadows for a moment that would echo across generations. He was molding your integrity, refining your heart, and stretching your endurance. Because what He's called you to carry isn't small. It's weighty. It's generational. It's legacy. When you rise, you're not just shifting your own bloodline. You're awakening purpose in lives you haven't even met yet. People are watching you more closely than you know. And not because you're perfect, but because you're parson real. They relate to your struggle and they're rooting for your rise. They're not cheering because you've arrived. They're cheering because your journey proves that arrival is possible. Your scars have become sacred to someone else's healing. Your story isn't just yours anymore. It's a lifeline. When heaven answers, it rarely uses a microphone. It uses a life. God answers desperation with demonstration. That's why He's raising you. Because someone who looks like you, who's been through what you've endured, needs to see what glory looks like on the other side of grief. Your rise is a living altar where others come to witness the faithfulness of God. Your life is the bridge between despair and destiny, between I can't make it and look what God did. You are heaven's strategy. Your rise didn't start with applause. It started with surrender. It started with yes in a place of pain. And now that you're walking into your season of visibility, remember, your rise is not just for your reputation. It's for their restoration. You carry the evidence that God still resurrects, still redeems, still restores. And because of that, your elevation is no longer optional. It's essential. So let them whisper. Let them watch. Let them wonder how you made it. Because every time you rise, you preach a sermon without words. You declare that God is still lifting the lowly, that He still uses the unlikely, that He still raises the rejected. They may fear your rise, but you were never called to live in their comfort zone. You were called to rise. So, race anababu ay.